us for today's meetings. I would like to call the Dental Hygiene Board of California to order. We are going to start the meetings with a roll call, and it is 9:03. Secretary Pajol, would you please take the roll and announce if a quorum is established?
Susan Good.
Present.
Thank you. Michelle Hurlbut.
Present.
Noel Kelch.
Present.
Sandra Klein.
Present.
Timothy Martinez.
Present.
Nicolette Moultrie.
Present.
Edselen Pujol, present. Gary Shea.
Present.
Evangeline Ward.
Present.
All are here. and
That is
cancelled.
definitely a quorum. Wonderful to have everybody here. That doesn't always happen, so thank you very much. Before we discuss items on the agenda, I do have a few announcements to make. First of all, on housekeeping, the restrooms are real important. Apparently, and I haven't seen them yet, but they are to the right, then to the right to go through the double glass doors, and then to the left. So right, left. Second, the meeting is being webcast through website links, so our meeting is live on air. The meeting is also digitally recorded to ensure accuracy for the meeting's written minutes. And little reminder to please take a moment to turn your cell phones to silent, vibrate or off, to eliminate the possibility of disruption during the meeting. And in a continuous effort to be green, and you can see that I'm not, many of our members and staff will be viewing the meeting materials on their laptops or other electronic devices rather than a hard copy binder like this during the meeting. And lastly, to comply with the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act, all action items of the board and subcommittee meetings and meetings consisting of 3 or more members are now required to record the vote or abstention of each member present for that action item. This means that the board and subcommittee meeting minutes must include each of the members' name under the appropriate vote category of yes, no, abstention, or other. Staff has prepared voting records for the full board and subcommittee votes for each action item. And that's all of my announcements, so I welcome you and we'll proceed with the meeting. And that takes us to the next agenda item, which is the President's report. So I think that's me again. And pardon my Lauren Bacall voice. I seem to have come back from a vacation with a voice that won't go away. So, I mean, it's a good thing it doesn't go away, but it'd be nice to kind of have it a little bit back to normal. But anyway, I'm hopeful. So, first of all, I wanted to let everyone know that I attended the August 15th dental board meeting in San Francisco on your behalf and presented our board activities. And since our last board conference call meeting in August, I've also been on several conference calls with the executive officer and DCA executive staff regarding the board's executive officer evaluation that we completed in April. And also to hear the results of the DCA executive officer salary survey that was completed this past year. And as you are probably aware, our recommendations for the executive officer's salary adjustments are forwarded to DCA and then ultimately to the governor's office for final approval. And despite our multiple communications, we have not yet received a definitive answer on our executive officer salary recommendation for this year. So I believe we can probably assume that our recommendation was not heeded. This, in conjunction with the salary increase recommendation having been not heeded in the previous year, means that, like many other boards under DCA, will probably be affected by a salary compaction before our next review period in April 2020. And what that means is that the salary of our executive officer will soon be too close to that of other DHBC staff, and there really should be a moderate separation between staff and the executive officer because of the level of responsibility involved. So this will probably be a concern that we will need to address in that April review period. On September 18th and 19th, there was a veteran stand down in Fresno. It was known as the largest stand down in the Central Valley, and dental hygiene services were provided to veterans at that event by the nonprofit group Healing California. And I was able to receive our board's outreach material and distributed it at a booth sponsored by the Fresno Elks Lodge, which provided complimentary dental hygiene kits. I really thank the DHBC staff for their responsiveness in getting the outreach materials to us, and we were in the Central Valley at that large stand down. There were about 500 to 750 vets that came through over a two-day period. And then lastly, and quite sadly, I report that we potentially have 4 board members whose terms end this year who may not be coming back unless they seek reappointment. They include 2 of our public members, Sandy Klein and Edsel Pujol. Their terms end January 1st, and that's because their positions are now appointed by the Assembly and the Senate. Noelle Kelsch, our RDHAP representative, who may be reappointed, and then Michelle Hurlbut, who she is our dental hygiene RDH education representative, and she's ending her second and final term, but she may serve a 1-year grace period if no one is appointed in her place. So in advance of not knowing what is going to happen, we thank each of them for their very valuable contributions to our board, and please know that we will certainly miss each of you should you not seek reappointment or not be able to continue your service. It's been quite a good experience to have you with us, and we appreciate you. And this concludes my report. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to item number 3, which is public comment for items not on the agenda.
Good morning, I'm Anthony Lum, the Executive Officer of the Dental Hygiene Board, and the only reason I received a public comment email after the meeting materials went out, and I felt that this issue was important enough to bring forth, so I just wanted to read you the letter that was sent to me, and it's in regards to informed consent of treatment from RDHAPs. And this is from Debbie Narciso. I hope I don't butcher her name too bad. And what she writes is, Dear Mr. Lum, please consider my request to add a contribution to the public comment into your November 22nd DHBC meeting. The topic is signed informed consent prior to dental hygiene care as a proposed law for RDHAPs. The problem is, as written, I skipped a paragraph here. It says, background. In 2017, CDA announced that Governor Jerry Brown signed AB 2235 into law, requiring a signed consent form prior to pediatric sedation dentistry. This was in reaction to the unfortunate deaths of minor children who underwent sedation provided by California licensed dentists. It's now part of the Dental Practice Act, where being in breach of these laws is considered unprofessional conduct. The problem is, as written, this recent law is limited. It doesn't take into consideration other vulnerable patient populations, nor does it address consenting to other forms of invasive dental services where treatment could potentially pose a risk for harm. At best, informed consent is considered an ethical duty to involve patients in a meaningful way. However, it's a variable standard of care that's assumed is used to advise patients about the risk, benefits, alternatives to treatment. After an extended search, it appears there's no specific laws requiring general dentists or RDHAPs to obtain a signed consent prior to any type of dental treatment. This poses a liability not only to patients, but to the dental professional who could be at risk for a lawsuit. California's RDHAPs are focused on serving predominantly vulnerable patient populations, most of whom experience challenges accessing care. It's incumbent upon them to be particularly vigilant, assuring these patients and their guardians, conservators, have all information needed to make informed decisions. The patient populations I'm most familiar with are adults with developmental disabilities. They can be extremely resistive to office-based care, unable to comprehend complex information, or ask questions related to the treatment. These patients require sedation dentistry for their comprehensive dental care, but rely on the RDHAP for interim prevention care. In-home treatment addresses advanced stages of periodontal disease, and gaining cooperation may require the use of various types of restraints: physical, mechanical, chemical, as well as the use of chemotherapeutic agents to address high risk for caries and periodontal diseases. This is a complex level of care, and we're fortunate to have a highly skilled cadre of professionals. However, the fact is that all of these special needs patients do not have the capacity to understand all of this complex information or to consent for themselves. This is compounded by the fact many do not have a conservator or guardian or other than social services agencies as their designee. In these cases, our medical director is the one who signs consent on the consumer's behalf. The number of individuals seen by RDHAPs in my regional center alone is approximately 1,000 patients and growing. But consider that number multiplied by the rest of California, along with all the other potential vulnerable population groups that could be affected by an unregulated standard of care. This isn't a hypothetical worry on my part. I recently discovered that a licensed RDHAP with a large patient caseload of our consumers provided complex care on an unconserved adult without our agency's direct referral and without our written consent. Come to find out, she doesn't have signed consent forms for any of her patients, going back 10 years. Upon further investigation of all 6 of our vendor RDHAP providers, their consent process is a mixed bag. Only 2 obtain comprehensive signed consent forms, 4 use only HIPAA form for privacy of patient information, none have their forms in languages other than English, 1 verbally reviews consent for treatment for each visit, and none include written consent for the use of restraints that may be utilized in the course of treatment. We don't doubt that this particular RDHAP skills, clinical skills, and no direct harm came to her patient, but because the patient's legal designee was not consulted, this patient's rights were violated. In a 2017 article published in the CDA Journal on informed consent, more than just a form, the author noted the importance of consent. And the quote from that article is, "Making an informed decision is the right of every patient, but it's the responsibility of dentists to ensure patients have the comprehensive information needed to exercise that right. Patients have numerous options when it comes to their oral health, and only with thorough considerations of risks, benefits, and alternatives can they truly provide informed consent." Her solution on this, as far as a recommendation, maybe it's time to consider the importance of signed informed consents and whether there should be laws developed to protect vulnerable patients who are unable to consent for themselves. Even if it's not considered a law for general dentists, RDHAPs should be willing to lead the way. Respectively submitted.
While I respect what this person is saying, we have already built into our system, within the educational system, we have, people have to learn. So that people have to learn about informed consent. I think that we could end up with a laundry list of each individual thing, and I don't think that's the point or purpose of this. This is already built into the system within the state, and I think we have to go back and look at the state mandates as well as the federal mandates that already require this.
I have a quick question. I missed a part of what you said. Who was it that was signing on their behalf?
Nobody was signing on that.
No, there was one part where you said someone was signing on the behalf.
Usually the medical director.
Conservator.
They said the medical director, I believe.
So is that like the conservator?
When I believe it's the individual when they are admitted into a facility, it's the director of that facility.
So they're
that takes-
legally responsible?
Correct.
That's what I wanted to know. Okay, thank you.
Madam President, this is public comment. I don't think we should be, I think I'm all for, at some point, maybe putting it on agenda for a future agenda item, but I don't think we're supposed to be talking.
Are there any other public comments from members in the audience? Come on up. And I didn't say this, but we have, in the interest of being able to hear from everybody, but I don't think we're going to have a problem, we do have a 3-minute time frame, but you're probably familiar with that. Yes, come on up to the microphone, and that's for the benefit of the conferencing that we're doing. Thank you.
Turn on.
Yeah, make sure it's turned on, it'll turn red.
Okay, hello, my name's Holly Burgos. I'm an RDHEP. I've been a hygienist for nearly 40 years. I've been an educator for about 30-some years. I've held office in number of offices in our component level. And I just wanted to put something forth that I hope you might consider. It's regarding punitive procedures of our dental hygiene board to apply to our members in our profession. I'm asking that maybe we restructure or reevaluate how we implement punitive procedures on hygienists who have had maybe an infraction in their past nearly 10 decades ago. Is it something that we should really be carrying over and allowing to affect their career and their money-making ability, their family structure, if it's something that was done and atoned for and fines paid and classes taken, years and years and years ago before they're even at the age of 21. So my question and I'm hoping that you will have some discussion and maybe look at what we put in place, what you put in place as restrictions or prohibitions or whatever you want to call it on licenses, preventing our members from being able to make a livelihood, but yet charging them up to $500 a month for testing and probationary procedures when they're not able to make an income, especially people who have worked 4 to 5 years to become a hygienist and have done great things to the community, are loved by their doctors, all these things. So that's just my request, is look at do we look at the individual, do we look at all the circumstances, are we looking at all the things that come into play when they come to the table and when they apply to licenses? Is it extreme to think that infractions from our youth can come to haunt us and keep being punished for it over and over again? I guess that's my request. And I guess just look at the person as an individual rather than it being a blanket rule, maybe, or something like that. So I think that's it. Just is it reasonable? Is it what we're putting in place, infractions on people? So that's it.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have any other public comment? Seeing none, we will then go on to the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of the August 6th, 2019 full teleconference meeting minutes. That is in your packet, and do we have a motion?
I motion to approve the August 6, 2019 teleconference meeting minutes.
The motion has been made by Nikki Moultrie. Is there a second?
I second it.
And it has been seconded by Tim Martinez. Discussion. Any discussion from the public? Seeing none, we will then proceed to the vote. Secretary Pujol, please call the vote.
Susan Good,
Aye.
Michelle Hurlbut. Aye. Noel Kelch,
I abstain, I wasn't there.
Timothy Martinez,
Aye.
Sandra Klein,
Abstain.
Nicolette Moultrie,
Aye.
Edselen Pujol, abstain. Gary Shea,
Abstain.
Evangeline Ward. The approval motion has passed.
Thank you very much. We will then move on to item number 5, which is the Executive Officer's Report. Anthony Lump, please present that agenda item.
Thank you again, Anthony Lund, Executive Officer, Dental Hygiene Board. Budget report is in your meeting materials, and if you look at the first page. Oh, is that why I was green? Oh, okay, gotcha. The first document, as far as the attachment is concerned for the budget report, is our expenditure projections for the current fiscal year, kind of our checkbook, as I usually term it. And if you look through there, if we do our full expenditures as projected, by the end of the year in the lower right-hand corner, we should have over 5% left in our budget. I did want to point out, if you look in the highlighted column, the furthest one to the right, our budget for this year in total, authorized expenditures is about $2.2 million. And just as a comparison, when we started this program 10 years ago, we were only at about $900,000. So we've grown quite a bit in 10 years. Moving on to the next attachment. This one I decided to bring back because it was kind of difficult to track our revenue for a little bit because our reports, they weren't as familiar because with the new system going into play, I wasn't sure about the numbers coming in. So I took this chart out for a little bit, and this shows our revenue that we receive on an annual basis. The latest trend that we have shows that our revenue stays pretty much around 1.8 million, between 1.8 and 1.9 million. And the lowest column on the far right-hand side is only through fiscal month 3, so through September, and it looks like we're still on track for about 1.8 million. So our revenue is staying consistent, which is a good thing, and helps to keep our savings account full. So if you look on the next chart, this is just a sample of our new reports that we're receiving. They're really different from the prior reports that we had, and this is something that's not normally in our meeting materials, but I just wanted to give you a sample of what we receive. This one covers our revenue, and each item on there is a particular line item. For this one, since it's our revenue, it shows our fees. So I also get a report that shows all of our expenditures. It's not as detailed as our prior reports, but hopefully they'll be working on that once the fiscal system is fully implemented. Moving on to the next attachment, and this is what's called our fund condition, and this is our quote savings account, and shows how our operations are from a year-by-year basis. And the main numbers that you need to look at are down on the bottom where it says months in reserve. So beginning this year, we're going to have, if everything works out right, roughly 9 months of a reserve. However, with our looking back at the prior charts, when you compare our revenue at 1.8 million to our expenditures at over 2 million, there's a little bit of a structural imbalance there. And what that's going to lead to is if our revenues just stay the same across the board, our expenditures are always going to go up because we never get a discount on items that we work on. Then what's going to happen is we're going to have to need more revenue. So I just want to put it out there that in the future, we are going to see fee increases at some point in time, kind of like how everybody says how a recession's coming, but whenever that's going to occur. But when I initially raised fees back in 2014, I projected that it would last for about 5 years. So we're at the 5-year mark now, but our fund is doing well, so we don't have to propose any fee increases at the current time. So we're doing okay. Let's see. Any questions on the budget report? Okay, seeing none. The next section for myself is about personnel. And since our last meeting in April, I reported out that we actually had 3 vacancies at that time. And since that time, we filled 2 of them. And the last one, because duties have been kind of reassigned internally, it's being restructured, and we're working with HR to get a duty statement all set up, so that way we can address particular program needs. So hopefully we'll get that one filled. Also, as of July 1st, we were approved for 3 new positions, and that's a result of our budget change proposals that were submitted a year ago. And we're working to get those positions worked out through duty statements and created, and we'll fill those as soon as possible as well. The types of positions that they are, 2 are for licensing and 1 is for enforcement. So hopefully that'll help with our efficiencies internally. So with those new positions coming in-house, we'll actually have 13 staff altogether, which will make us the largest we've ever been. So hopefully we can address things more efficiently with the additional hands on deck. At the end of August, our longtime licensing analyst, Eleanor Steiner, retired. We've since hired for her position and backfilled it. And I want to welcome, actually all staff want to welcome Mike Walker to the board. And also we filled one of our vacancies in our enforcement area, and want to welcome Destiny Wells to the board as too. They both have DCA program experience and are catching on fast with our program. So we're looking forward to our continued relationship and working directly with them. I also want to put out huge kudos to all of my staff. This past year has been very busy. I can't believe it's Thanksgiving already next week. And everybody has stepped up above and beyond what they're required to do. Whenever somebody has left, other individuals have come in, kind of like that amoeboid, moving over into that new area to take over, and it's been wonderful. I can't say thank you enough to all the staff. And I appreciate all their willingness to help. So with 13 staff, our small office, if you've ever been there, is basically filled to capacity. So with that, I put in a request for some new office space. And unfortunately, we didn't get the penthouse on the Hilton or anything like that. But we do have some new space available that will be available in our existing building. So once the current incumbent tenant moves out of that suite, they're going to get a new office as well. Then we can backfill once the tenant improvements are done to that suite. And then we'll be moving, I project, probably sometime in 2021. The new lease was signed, so we are in our same building through 2027. In regards to the department, we have a new director. Her name's Kim Kirkmeyer. And she was recently appointed to the director's position and began working in that capacity on October 28th. She has extensive DCA knowledge and experience in working for the medical board as a manager, at the department as a deputy director, and most recently was the executive director of the medical board since 2013. So I really look forward to working with her and enhancing communications. The remaining 4 DCA exec positions, like the chief deputy director, and the 2 assistant deputy directors, have changed and are currently vacant, as all of them left DCA for other interests. Other items that we've been doing is, if you haven't noticed, over the summer we implemented a new website. So the homepage has changed, and items may be not so familiar if you're used to our old website. And it's a work in progress because we know there's some information that's still not on the website, and we're trying to comb through everything to make sure that everything that was on the old website is updated and put on the new website, and any new additional information is also added. So if you see anything of note, please email us if we don't catch it. My own participation on items, I did 2 outreach sessions last year, one with Loma Linda, or I should say since the last time I reported. One was with Loma Linda and the other one was with Southwestern College. I also participated in the CDHA Spring Scientific Session, and I understand for interest's sake, board members have opined that they would like to participate in outreach. And as Susan mentioned before, she did one in Fresno. And if other members would like to participate as well, it depends on the event. But glad to arrange for participation. I also participated in dental board meetings. I attended their May, the August, and November meetings, and represented us and reported out at one of them on our activities when the president couldn't attend. Let me see. I'm getting used to being electronic here because this is the first time I'm actually using my computer, so bear with me just for a second. I also have my hard copy here too. So, in the meeting packet, there is also a copy of the Commission on Dental Accreditation invitation for board meetings to attend site visits. So that was sent to us back in September, and it leaves the invitation for any board member who wants to attend. However, I believe there's kind of a strict privacy clause that you have to sign. So, if you want to chat about that, you can always contact me, and we'll chat more on that. On this next one, I did take the initiative because over the last 4 years since Breeze has been implemented, the goal was to have all of our licensees move to an online renewal system. An opportunity came up in the last couple of weeks where the Office of Information Services indicated that there were strict timelines that we could adhere to implement that as quickly as possible. So I agreed to have the paper renewals to cease. Those were sent out as complimentary anyways. And so we've been pushing licensees to go onto Breeze to renew anyways for the past 4 years actually. So what's going to happen is postcards will be sent to licensees, and this is just a reminder that your license renewal is coming up. It'll have our contact information on there and also the Breeze website, so that way it's easy information to access to renew your license. What did I have? I did gather some information about this change and what it will save us. This is not in the materials because, like I said, I just approved this information a couple weeks ago. But what it'll save us in postage and resource cost is roughly, last year we spent almost $12,000 just in sending complimentary renewals. So I think that's a huge savings for us since we are so small. And the effort to go green is strong with this effort in creating the computerized system. The next item is, I've been asked this a lot, when are the statute books coming out? I have a meeting scheduled for beginning of December with the DCA Office of Publications, and we'll be going over all the details in order to create a new statute book. Hopefully that'll be coming out sometime around spring of 2020. Try to get it faster, but we'll see on the timeline after our meeting. Also, we're going to be working on a new newsletter, and that should be coming out as well in sometime in the spring of 2020. So hopefully those will be completed projects by that time. This last item that I've been working on, it's the Executive Officer Salary Study. And what this is that the Department of Consumer Affairs conducted an Executive Officer salary study over the past year that consisted of phone interviews and an extensive written survey administered by a third-party contractor for all of the DCA executive officers to accumulate data. And that was a comparison to other states' executive officer salaries and what they could identify as far as pitfalls are concerning with what the data that they accumulate. And for our program specifically, the results of the study were released in July. And for our board, it was determined that there is a salary compaction issue between myself and my assistant executive officer. And any further action as a result of this study is still to be determined. And so I'm just reiterating what Susan said earlier in her report. And I do want to thank Susan for all of her support through the EO evaluation and the study. she's been right there with me throughout the process, and a lot of times individuals don't listen to me, and with her support, it helped out quite a bit. So thank you. The next item I have is something that is always brought up at every meeting, and that's future agenda items. And I wanted to address some of these that we've been working on. The first one is the uniform standards and disciplinary guideline revisions. That has been brought up at a couple of meetings, and we did start the work on those. However, it's a larger project than just simply editing the existing guidelines, and so it'll be ongoing for a little bit further. We're going to meet extensively with Jason over here in legal and work out all the details. And this was the actual action item for enforcement subcommittee. However, since it's an ongoing issue, it's the reason why I didn't agendize the enforcement subcommittee. Another issue that was brought up was enforcement tracking methods and how to improve those. We've been working on that on an ongoing basis, and I think when you get the data at our next meeting, it'll show the results. With enforcement, it takes time to identify and show results in reports, and this short duration that we've had in the last 6 months doesn't capture all of the accuracy in the changes in the tracking methods. So a little bit of time is warranted, and I think you'll see the difference in our at our next meeting in the reports. The next issue that was requested was fictitious name permits and whether individual licensees could renew those online, and you can. So that was done. Another one is whether the board accepts individual tax identification numbers in lieu of social security numbers, and we do. So that's done as well. Let's see. Another issue that came up, and I think this was at our last meeting, is a request for kind of a hybrid license for the RDH and RDH-APs to combine fees and licenses, so that way it would be a single license structure. What I found out in researching that is it would be very cost prohibitive to do so, because the way that the BREEZE system was created, its structure is based upon our business practices when BREEZE was initiated. So all the structure, everything that's created for the processes are similar to how we had before. And so by combining these, there's a few issues that may arise. One is that creating a new license category creates additional costs, and BREEZE is not cheap to modify. And whether we can even do it or not is a question that's above my knowledge on it. Another thing is if we combine into a hybrid license, as you know, RDH-APs are only recognized in California. So whether it has RDH and RDH-APs listed on that license, I can't speak for other jurisdictions, but that license may not be accepted in other jurisdictions. So, and the other issue that I had was if the presentation of this hybrid license intent was to basically save cost in the license renewal fees, because it's $160 for each license, for a total of $320. If you break it down over a 2-year span, it comes out to $13.33 per month, and that's for 2 licenses. So in my opinion, I don't think it's that much of a cost, and for 700 licensees that we have as RDH-APs, the bang for the buck that we would get in modifying BREEZE just wouldn't pay off. The next item that I have is our diversion contract, and the contract was completed and a request for proposal was sent out. It came back that only one bidder for that contract was approved, and I believe Maximus is now going to be the continuing provider of diversion. Program scored them this week, and I don't have the final details, but they were the only vendor, so we'll have to find out and see on the final results. The next request was the law and ethics exam and whether students could take that prior to graduation. And Going back to the structure of Breeze again, when we formulated and created the structure to review applications, we set it up to where all the requirements come in, and then the law and ethics exam would be your final hurdle in order to obtain the license. And going back to have the system modified to accept the law and ethics exam prior to all of the other requirements, it would just be very cost prohibitive to do so. It's very expensive, and it's basically restructuring the entire program. And everybody knows we spent a ton on that program. So I don't think it's something that we will be pursuing. The system works right now. The law and ethics exam, I think there was a concern when the results went down a couple of years ago. But again, I've heard comments from students that many of them honestly may not take it seriously, and I give them advice to take it just as seriously as your clinical exam. So with that, any questions on my executive officer's report?
I had a question. I just wanted to go back to when we talked about office lease previously, that there was some concerns, especially with the amount of hours your staff puts in with the building that was going to be built next door. Is that still in place?
The city has not determined what they're going to put in the building next to us.
Okay.
It's still vacant. However, multiple boards have voiced for tenant improvements on the building, just to make it more secure. Before, we didn't have individuals who just come off the street had easy access to our building, other than the main entrance. So what's one major thing that we put around, and the building owners had put around, is a big iron gate.
Okay.
So we're secluded that way, and the parking lot is already enclosed. So, and we have security. So they're doing everything that they can to keep us in that building and
So
keep
that
us safe.
situation has changed then from
Yes, with the
previously?
building improvements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tony, I have a question specifically about the diversion contract. We had issues with the previous contract as far as fees that were charged to us.
Yes,
Have you,
I addressed those.
so that's,
So now, built into the contract, our board specifics say that participants will pay the full ride.
okay,
We will not be supplementing participants.
okay, thank you.
Tony, I have a quick question. Can you clarify when you said RDHAPs are only specific for California?
Correct. The HAP category is only recognized in California.
So the okay, but there's town amount, maybe workforces in other states that might be tantamount? Because there's public health hygienists and can practice solo. I was just curious. So maybe that designation of RDHAP is specific only for the state of California?
Correct.
Okay.
And I want to comment on the moving to all online applications. When Tony had first talked to me about this, I had a great concern about those people in an older age category, like myself and others that are in the profession, that are really intimidated by an online application and only an online application. And so I thought that there was going to be a sentence that was that once if there was any difficulty, that they could call the office, and there was another alternative way of doing the application. Is that correct?
That's correct. We do have a hard copy in the office, so those individuals, and they are far and few between, that call us up and say, I don't know where my license renewal is, I have no computer, I'm computer illiterate, I can't renew through Breeze, do you have anything for me, or can you send me another renewal? We will have a hard copy available that we can either mail or scan to the person if they are computer illiterate enough or literate enough to receive a scan. We will have something for them.
But that is on the postcard that's being sent out.
It can be, yes.
That was what, to me, it is very important from a consumer standpoint to have that statement on that card, because there are many areas of the state that do not have reliable access to broadband and internet. And therefore, would need that assistance, and they should not be held back from that, and it should be explicitly stated there so they know that.
Any other questions? That concludes my report. Thank you.
We'll proceed on to the next item on the agenda, which is the update from the Dental Board of California. He was just looking at me. We are now going to item 6, update from the Dental Board of California.
Good morning, President Good, Executive Officer Lum, members of the board and staff. My name is Karen Fisher, and I'm the Executive Officer of the Dental Board of California. Thank you for inviting me to participate in your meeting today and to give you an update on our activities. Dental Board President Fran Burton had intended to be here today. She sends her best regards and apologies. She had an emergency at home that she needed to stay home and take care of. And so she sends also her holiday greetings, as she will be coming off the board as president only. By the end of the year, she will continue to serve as a member of the board. The board successfully completed our sunset review last year. It was a lengthy 2-year period. We provided a very hefty background report, and yet it was a very successful sunset review in that the board was able to get a lot of the changes in statute that will allow us to more efficiently and effectively do our business. I just was going to relay a few of the pieces of legislation that AB 1519 encompasses and will become effective January 1st of 2020. The board's going to be combining its dental assisting fund with its dental fund. And that'll we're in the process of working with the budget office to complete that, and it will be completed by July 1st of 2022. There were a couple of statutory changes that affect teledentistry. Teledentistry is sort of an up-and-coming idea. Telehealth has been around for a while. Teledentistry offers a little bit more challenges, if you will. And one of the changes essentially that was made in statute includes the requirement for the notice to consumers, which all practitioners are currently required to post. And now the requirement will also go forward for any companies doing teledentistry, that they'll have to let the consumers know where they can contact the board if they have a problem. Another teledentistry issue related to requiring licensees, it makes it failure by a treating dentist prior to the initial diagnosis and correction of malpositions of human teeth, or initial use of orthodontic appliances to perform an examination pursuant to other sections of the statute, including the review of the patient's most recent diagnostic, digital or conventional radiographs, and other equivalent bone imaging suitable for orthodonture to the definitions of unprofessional conduct. And additionally, any individual, partnership, or corporation or other entity that provides dental services through telehealth shall make available the name, telephone number, practice address, California state license, number of the dentist who will be involved in providing the services to the patient prior to rendering the services and when requested by the patient. And a violation of this will be unprofessional conduct. And lastly, we have statutory authority now that prohibits dental services from requiring a patient to sign an agreement that limits the patient's liability to file a complaint with the board. Those were significant changes made to teledentistry, and I expect that moving in the future, the board will consider other teledentistry changes in statute to ensure public protection moving forward. We added a requirement that applicants who are applying for licensure by REB or ADEX can only use those test scores within the last 5 years prior to applying for application for licensure. We additionally made some changes to our residency pathway to licensure that says that a candidate can only go back 2 years in order to apply for licensure by residency. Some of the things the board's been working on a long time as we are out of the business effective January 1st of 2020, approving foreign dental schools. So we have 2 approved foreign dental schools right now. If by January 1st of 2024 they are not CODA approved, the students attending those schools will no longer be eligible to apply for licensure in California because California will not have approved their educational program. One of the provisions of AB 15 now requires in our most egregious disciplinary cases that those probationers will have to notify their patients that they are on probation, similar to the requirements that have been in effect for the medical board. So the legislature felt that that was an important issue and they wanted it extended to the dental board also. Let's see. We added statutory provision that allows somebody who was requesting a new license to replace a canceled license to go by another pathway rather than having to essentially pay all the back licensing fees. I think that this is going to be a big help, particularly to our dentists who, say, got a license in California 20 years ago and moved to another state and is practicing all this time. Until this legislation was passed, the only way that they could get their license back in California was to pay all the back licensing fees, all the back renewal fees, and delinquency fees, which was a pretty hefty amount of money. We streamlined that because it seemed as a penalty, essentially, for those people wanting to come back into the state. So that will go into effect January 1st of 2020. And last but not least, and there were a number of other changes that were made, but essentially we codified the continued suspension of the RDA practical exam. So RDAs now will not have to take a practical examination. They'll be taking what we call the combined written law and ethics examination moving forward. Additionally, we are also, the board at its meeting last week heard the discussion about requiring licensees to complete renewals online in the future and wholeheartedly support that effort, directed staff to start the process. When we even brought up the idea that we're going to transition to just sending out a postcard, they said, we should just make the jump, and we have the ability to collect email addresses. In fact, dentists are required to submit their email addresses. We could send out a reminder via email that we at some point in time will only be accepting renewals online. And we got the full support of the board to move forward with that. It will be a tremendous cost savings to us also. And also, just as an example, if somebody continues to send in a paper renewal, it takes 4 to 6 weeks to process that, and oftentimes there are deficiencies, and it just takes a long time. Now, dentists and RDAs, or any of our licensees, if your license is not renewed by the renewal date, there is no grace period, you should not be practicing. So I believe that if we can move everybody to an online system, it's going to be helpful for everybody. And we have staff available to assist people on the phone to be able to walk them through the process. So we're going to do an outreach to people to try to allay their fears moving forward. And like anything, I think once people become familiar with how to do it, they'll say, why didn't I do this a long time ago? Because it's just so much easier. And I consider myself in that older group, like Ms. Good has said, but even I have to get away from this paper at some point and trust technology that comes out. So we'll be moving forward with that. We were very pleased that the board went along with that. At the meeting last week, also, the board voted to accept the ADEX examination. So in addition to REB and portfolio, candidates will be eligible to have taken the REB through a regional testing agency effective as of last week. It will take us probably 4 to 6 months to get that lined up in Breeze, but we will be moving forward with that, and we'll be putting all this information on our newly revised website also, so that it'll be available for everybody to see. We have 11 regulatory packages in various processes, and we are grateful that the legal department has hired their regulatory unit, and we have high hopes that they'll be moving some of these packages that have been stalled for a long time down the track, so to speak. So we're looking forward to tying up a lot of loose ends that we've had out there, similar to your board. So the future is very bright. The Dental Assisting Council reviewed and discussed the Dental Assisting Comprehensive Rulemaking Package. This has been in the works for probably 5 years or more. The Dental Assisting Council did recommend the proposal be forwarded to the board to consider initiation of the rulemaking at its February meeting. The rulemaking includes educational program and course requirements, examination requirements, and licensing requirements for the dental assisting program. Throughout the last 5 years, board staff has worked with stakeholders to produce this document, and the board hosted a number of workshops allowing for public input into the development of this current proposed language, and we're looking forward to initiating that and moving that forward also. 3 of our board members will be coming off the board. Their last meeting was last week. They get to serve out their term until December 31st, and it's going to be a huge loss for us. Dr. Bruce Butcher, Dr. Hong Lei, and Yvette Chappelle Ingram was our public member. Dr. Witcher and Dr. Lei did serve out their grace periods and have been on the board over 10 years. It's going to be a huge loss for us historically. We're hoping to continue their involvement as subject matter experts with us as we move forward. Yvette Chappelle Ingram has been an awesome public member for the equally amount of time. She was available. She was going to have the option of serving another year as a grace period, but because of personal reasons, she declined to move forward with that. So effective January 1st of 2020, we will actually have 4 vacancies on our board. Dr. Lei holds the position of a dentist that's working for a community care clinic. Dr. Witcher is an oral surgeon, however, he holds a position just as a designated dentist. And then we have 2 public members, all appointed by the governor. So we'll be working with the governor to fill those vacancies. And lastly, we conducted our elections at the meeting last week, and Dr. Tom Stewart will again be the board's president. He has served before, and I'm looking forward to working with him. Dr. Stephen Chan is a pediatric dentist out of the Bay Area. He will be taking over as vice president. And Joanne Pacheco, a name that's familiar to you all, is our hygienist on the board, and she'll be taking over as board secretary. That concludes my remarks, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have. Awesome.
Ms. Fisher, on the application online, so you're going to be sending out emails. In that email, and plus you have staff on, to help on an orally, to go walk through the process, and is that going to be stated in that email?
We haven't determined what the email is going to say. We haven't determined the specifics of how we're going to move forward, but we are going to start to provide the outreach to let people know what we're going to be doing. We don't have close to 65% of our licensees already renew online, and so we're just looking at a small portion of people that we're going to be working with. We also have 18 licensing categories, so for us this is a huge deal to encourage people to move in that direction, which means about 55,000 essentially people that could renew in any 1 year, taking into consideration all the license types that we have. So we'll be working to try to find out as a painless way of moving in this direction, but it was unanimous that the board felt that this was necessary. So we'll be walking through the process with people.
Okay.
Karen, I have a quick question. What examples, when you said the word egregious, have to notify the patient, is there categories that are listed in language?
Yes, I don't have it in front of me, and I can certainly get that information to you, but it's like sexual misconduct,
Okay.
Drug or alcohol abuse, some of the more egregious types of things, and I'd be happy to give you that information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Martinez. Well, thank you. Wishing you all a happy and healthy holiday season coming up, and look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you very much for being here, and really appreciated that nice, thorough report. Thank you. We will now recess to convene our subcommittee meetings, and the first one is the Education Subcommittee. The chairman is Edselen Pujol, Nicolette Moultrie, Gary Shea, and Evangeline Ward. So we will take all of, the rest of us will leave and welcome you to the board. Committee.
Education Subcommittee meeting to order, and the time I have is 10:02. We'll start with a roll call. Edselen Pujol, present. Nicolette Moultrie.
Present.
Gary Shea. Present. Evangeline Ward. Present. The next item on the agenda is the chairperson's report, and I have no chairperson's report. Next on the agenda is the discussion and possible action and recommendation to the full board on the following proposed regulatory package: 16 CCR, Section 1105, requirements for RDH educational programs, including the acceptance of advanced placement, coursework, or examination by dental hygiene educational programs.
So this agenda item, we're working on regulations. It was brought to the board's attention that in our requirements currently for the dental hygiene educational programs is that coursework is identified as actually having to be done. However, schools now accept advanced placement results from individuals who have completed coursework in high school and then take a supplemental exam to show that they are competent to a certain level. And this coursework is actually for prerequisites to get into the dental hygiene program. It's in math and English. So what we're looking at is to modify our regulations to accept the AP coursework in lieu of having to take an actual course. It just seems redundant if somebody's already at a certain level that they would need to take a college level course if they're already competent in that area. So that's our modification in the regulations. And we propose it to the, did you have something? I give it to Adina.
Hello, Adina Petty, DHBC educational specialist. In addition to the language that would accept AP exam work, we also have reviewed other areas within 1105 for changes that would flow more with the way the education is being conducted within, or acceptance within the dental hygiene programs.
Shall we, are there any questions, or should I ask for a motion?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Excuse me, just for the sake of keeping it on record, can we use the microphone when we make motions? Thank you.
Move to adopt.
I second.
Any member discussion?
I'm Tony Steve. Oh, members.
Go ahead, Nikki.
I just wanted to add that with us doing these changes, we do align ourselves with AB 705 that was passed a couple of years ago regarding the English and math pathways for students graduating from high schools into community colleges and CSUs and Cal State universities. So I think it's just smart for the board to get on board.
Any other member discussion? Public comment?
Tona Steve, Java Valley College, and I was actually going to mention what Nicole Moultrie just mentioned. Also, education code, is this the same one? 79500, requires community colleges to accept AP courses as prerequisites. I'm not quite sure where the language in our statutes is saying that we can't. I'm not quite sure where and this is just why we have to change our law, because it's not, I'm seeing that we are following code requiring college level courses, and that for our science courses, it has to be a university discipline, but I'm not seeing where AP doesn't qualify, because AP is a college level course. Looking at the AP Higher Ed edcollegeboard.org, the courses are developed by university and college professors. The AP exams are developed also by college professors. The coursework is done in the high school, but it's college level. Typically what in a college setting would be done in a semester is done in a year. And then the AP exam is just there to confirm that the coursework that was done at the high school level, or in the high school setting, is universal throughout the country. Where they're saying a 3, 4, or 5 kind of corresponds to a final grade of a C, B, or A. So I just wanted to add that into that. And we are in that we are allowing university disciplines and equivalent. UCSF does allow science courses, AP science courses, to qualify to the dental school.
Yes, go ahead, Gary.
I'm a little confused with your testimony. It seemed that you were in favor of allowing this.
Absolutely.
That you think the law already allows it, and what we're doing is clarifying it. So I'm not sure what the objection is.
No, I'm not objecting. I'm definitely for it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Lisa Kamibayashi from West Los Angeles College. I'm supporting the AP to be accepted at a college level course, but you have to think a little bit deeper. Now, community colleges, California Chancellor is recommending to have statistics and critical thinking as a minimum requirements to transfer to UC and CSU level. I don't want students to think, or applicants to think, that's the minimum level of math and to be in the dental hygiene program. I think rather than that just math, I'm not sure what math level the AP math is. Is it college intro to algebra, or where is it? Statistics is really becoming a standard to moving into the university level. So I don't know, as far as AP goes, what math AP, is it AP statistic is allowed, or is it something existing? A little bit more detailed and specificities needed for dental hygiene license. And then also, other thing is admission criteria. According to the DHBC, the program has to select the students based on their performance. How's the AP test grading can be converted into the GPA, or how we can select the students when they're just submitting a score. So that's my just comments here.
Any member comment? Thank you. So we should move forward with a roll call vote on this motion. So the motion is to accept the requirements for RDH educational program, including the acceptance of advanced placement coursework or examination by dental hygiene educational programs. Edsel Pujol, aye. Nicolette Moultrie,
Aye.
Gary Shea,
Aye.
Evangeline Ward.
Aye.
Motion has been approved. Next item on the agenda is the discussion and possible action and recommendation to the full board on proposed draft application language for approval of new registered dental hygienists in alternative practice educational programs. Tony?
So carrying over from our prior meeting, we have a request for potentially a new RDHAP program, which has never come up in the past. And so we're kind of being reactive with this in getting our processes in place. So this is kind of step 2 of the process where we have the application for a new RDHAP program. At the last meeting, we approved the fee to review the application, and so now we've created the application, and we're trying to get this implemented as quickly as possible. So this is presented to you for discussion and possible action, so that way we can act upon the request for an RDHAP program.
Do we have a motion?
To adopt.
Second. Second.
Can we do that again? Sorry.
Yeah.
Move to adopt.
Second.
Member discussion? Any public comment? Okay, so we shall move forward with a roll call vote on this motion. Edsel Pujol, aye. Nicolette Moultrie,
Aye.
Gary Shea,
Aye.
Evangeline Ward.
Aye.
Motion is approved. Any public comment for items not on the agenda?
Vicki Kimbrough. I just wanted to see if there had been any additional information that came through regarding AB5 and contracted dentists at programs. It could be an issue, and I know, Tony, you sent out an email and everything, but I think it might behoove the board to really look into that and help programs with their HR departments regarding, having to hire an employee or faculty versus a contracted supervising dentist.
Thank you for your comment. Any other public comment? Any future agenda items that we need to discuss or bring up? In that case, I adjourn the educational subcommittee meeting. It's 10:15.
Kelsch. And members are Michelle Hurlbut, Gary Shea, and Evangeline Ward. Does it really? My goodness. Well, in that case, scratch that. Or do we just want to go with that?
I thought it was
Let's just go.
legislative was supposed to be on the agenda. It switched?
And it is indeed, our member Gary Shea is indeed correct. It does say on my agenda, licensing and examination. However, on my stack of these guys, it says legislative. So if there's no objection, we will go to legislative and then go back to licensing. Thank you.
the Legislative and Regulatory Subcommittee, and we'll do a roll call now. Noel Kelch is present. Michelle Hurlbut.
Present.
Gary Shea. Evangeline Ward. My chairperson's report, I have met with Mr. Lum and gone over the legislative things that we're bringing forward to discuss and do possible action on. I also have spent a lot of time investigating some of these areas so that we can bring this forward. I would ask today that we consider doing a single vote. I'm going to have Ms. Petty as well as Mr. Lum go through each of the proposed draft statutory language with us. And at the end, I would like to do a single vote rather than taking them one by one. Do we have any discussion on that? Okay, everyone okay with that? All right. I'm going to turn the time over now to Adina Petty and to Anthony Lum to go through the discussion and possible actions and recommendations to the board.
The Dental Hygiene Board reviewed our statutes, and what we did was we reviewed them for updates that would apply to current language and processes to bring everything up to date. So we've also had input by stakeholders as some of these statutes perhaps were not completely aligned with current laws in other areas. So we were looking at pursuing some legislation possibly to adjust these laws to bring everything, to clarify language and to bring everything up to date.
In the first section for 1902.3, what we found is because we have this special permit for teaching for individuals that are coming from out of state, the highlighted section in little f, it was, and I don't know if it was on purpose or what, but the expanded functions were left out as far as qualifications for somebody to teach. So what we've done is add that back in, and it's a substantive change, so we'll probably need legislation for that addition. But this way, individuals coming that want to teach here will have the full complement of qualifications that anybody from in California has to teach at a dental hygiene educational program. Any questions on 1902.3? Okay, I'll go to the next section. Oh, I'm sorry.
Joanne Galliano, and I think at this point, speaking as a public member, question, is it a specific course? Do they have to take the California course in expanded functions, or are we again going to approve education from another jurisdiction for another state, for example, that teaches that in their dental hygiene program, and they are legally allowed to do it by law in their state, but it's not, at this point what we've done is we've made them take our course, even though we can now approve courses.
Well, we're not able to approve courses yet from out of state. We're proposing that today. However,
Well, okay, so then I
when
guess,
when and if it's approved, then we will probably accept both.
okay. So at this point, if this goes through as written, it's going to require that a teacher coming from another state would have to take the California course on expanded functions as proof of, or could they, again, graduate from a program that teaches the course and the duties are allowed in their state and come? I just think we need to answer that question so that it's not confusing when an application does come through. It doesn't tell me as a person coming from out of state where I have to get, what do I have to furnish to prove that I have those expanded functions.
Well, it's not defined here because it would be defined in the regulations. This is in the statute. So this is just giving you the general requirement of what's needed, and then we'll further define it in regulation.
So at this point, we're not worried about how they meet that particular criteria. Okay.
Correct.
So do the committee members have any preference either way, whether to accept only California or to also accept out-of-state as well?
I think we should accept out of state, definitely.
No, I agree. If they attend a program, they teach it, and they're able to actually perform the duties, it should be fine.
And our, go
As
ahead.
long as it matches what we are saying in our state, and I think that needs to be really defined within this. And I think also that because you come in as a teacher doesn't mean that you're functioning as a registered dental hygienist, and we have to keep that clarified too. I think that's important.
Right, but at the same time, anesthesia that was taught when I was a student is different than what's being taught now. So how do you know what I'm trying to say? So some injections I was not taught. So am I not supposed to?
Do you know how to do them?
Yeah.
Well, I think if and when this statutory proposal is implemented, I think as Tony mentioned, the board can flush out the specifics of what will be required for in and out of state through regulation.
And further in the meeting when we get there, we do have the out-of-state SLN proposal for the regulations, so that'll further define. Right now, this is just the statute change, so this gives us the authority to have this requirement, and then later in our regulatory discussion, then you'll see what the details are.
I do have another question, though, before we leave this one. So it's going to be required to teach during clinical practice sessions.
Right, that's what I was just going to clarify.
Okay.
So what this means is they can come in and teach didactically, but if they choose to teach during clinical sessions, then they would need this, the SLN.
What about preclinic?
Any time injections are given. So we can change it to make it more clear.
Do any other members of the board have any other comments? Seeing none, we have a public member that has a comment.
Vicki Kimbrell. My question is, with this language, it doesn't specify whether this person has to ever apply for a California license. Will there be a term limit on permits? Can they stay here 10, 15 years having a contract and never have a California license?
I'd have to go back and research, but I think when this was initially proposed, there was no limit put on it, per se.
I don't think there was either, so that's my question now. Do we want to put a limit on whether this person, if they've relocated, they have a contract? I believe that the original intent was much like Nevada, where you can go to Nevada and apply for a special permit. It allows you to work at school under the scope of your license. However, you can't work anywhere else. But if the person permanently has relocated and has been working at the school or anything else, or at the school for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, should there be a term limit at this point of something like 5 years to get your California license? That's just a question.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comment from our board, our committee?
I do think she raises a good issue that I think we should look at. I really do. I do think, I know that it appears that, they have to pay the renewal fee. It appears in A that it's only a permit for the school.
Can I interrupt? Those other areas aren't agendized. It's only the highlighted sections that we can discuss.
But this impacts the highlighted section.
Okay, so I think it already says that it's only in a dental hygiene school. I don't think this permit will allow them to practice outside the school.
Correct. The permit is only for
Right.
educational program.
Right. But I do think that Dr. Kimbrough raises a good point about, is this perpetual or not? I don't think the spirit of what we're trying to do is we want it to be perpetual. I know in dentistry, oftentimes people come in to like dental schools for a period of time and leave, and we don't see that in dental hygiene programs, like our dental schools that might bring in a scholar for a few years and then they go back to where their country or wherever they lived before. So I do think we should add something in there. I'm for that.
May I suggest to the subcommittee that for this one section, 1902.3, we hold with adding that additional language in there? We can always bring it back. We just hold this section, bring it back to you with what's requested, and then you can re-review it for a future recommendation.
I personally think that we need to hold the whole thing until we get everything together, personally. Anyone else?
Well, my comment on that would be that the existing law is still there. So what you're doing, if this were to be adopted, is adding an additional requirement anyway. We still need to add yet another.
Correct.
But this does move it along and make it a little more restrictive still. So I have no objection to moving forward with this.
Okay. Anyone else have comments from the committee?
I'll work on some language for tomorrow if we can't get it done today in committee.
Thank you, Michelle.
Does the committee have a specific term limit period in mind, 5 years as the public member proposed, something shorter, something longer?
I have a question in that regard about how long does it take to actually get a license generally?
It depends on if they have completed it properly. If they've completed it properly, what is it, 60 days is your average turnaround?
That's it?
Yeah, if all the requirements are met and they've submitted everything along with the application and fees, right now we're kicking them out at 30 days, 35 days. We're allowed 90 days, but, depending if everything is submitted.
So if someone were to qualify for this with the things that are in here, it would only take 60 days for them to get licensed in California?
Correct, if they have all of the requirements completed.
I don't see any problem with making it within 1 year for that matter, then.
Well, it would, may I answer? I think if we allowed this permit, which we do, sometimes, I don't think I'm okay for 2 years.
Okay.
Two or 5. It seems like we go 2 or 5 all throughout our statute. So I'm good with 2 or 5.
And we'll come to you.
But I do have a question as far as procedure. We can't amend any of the other sections to add in the special permit for 2 years? Why can't we?
No, you can.
That's what I thought. We can. Okay. Well, I don't know. It seemed like Mr. Lum was saying we couldn't.
Essentially, you're just adding one subdivision, which is F here. I don't see any prohibition on adding an additional one.
Why couldn't we amend up above? We are doing, this whole section's open. I thought it would be open for discussion.
You could still add it. You could still have it add a G or whatever to the end, of your requirement for the years, because this lists the things that you have to do.
Well, it seems to me it should be the very first sentence. It's,
Could be,
something like,
but-
in the state, if he or she has a special permit, which will be in effect for, that seems the logical place to put a time frame. And I guess you're
that's
saying we
fair.
can't do that. We can do that?
Yes.
Okay.
And Michelle, would you?
No, I'm good. I'm thinking about it now.
Dr. Patton?
I just want to make sure to clarify any intent. So are you talking about just, so because there was discussion about them applying for a full California license, are you saying that, I just want to make sure, are you saying that after 2 years, they will be automatically, or they just have to apply? They will automatically receive a license after 2 years, or, okay, just wanted to make sure that was your intention. Okay.
I do think because we have the section number E, which says allows them to renew it, I think we should go out 5 years, which would allow them to renew. They would have it for 2 years, they were able to renew it, and maybe 1 more year, and then at that point would need to make a decision on whether they wanted to have a license or not. That way you don't have to mess with the other sections.
Are there committee members amenable to that period?
If it only takes 60 days to get it, I'm not understanding why we would extend this to 5 years to have to get it.
Well, it could be, in my opinion, it could be, I'm just trying to think how educational programs are. It could be that someone came in for a special project, an educational program. Maybe they want to implement research into their curriculum and they've never done that, and they wanted to bring in some subject matter expert in the area of research and let them get going on it. And it, quite honestly, it takes a little bit of time to kind of change those things. So 5 years doesn't seem out of sorts in my mind as an educator. I don't know how the other educators feel, but.
I'm going more along Gary's line, and then the other thing that I'm thinking about is that we're going to be overseeing this person because they're in an educational program, so we need the funding that comes out of licensure, and I think 2 years is a good period of time to allot that.
I'd be willing to go with 2 years.
Well, may I ask, is this a concern now? Do we have people in place where they stay there for 5, 10 years? Okay, so just something we get in place in case this happens.
Mm-hmm. If that's the case, then we need to strike E. Then if it's only 2 years, then there's no need for them to renew.
No, E addresses the application fee. It's not a renewal fee.
It says biennial renewal fee. It's the application fee? It's not the permit fee? Isn't it the permit fee?
Subject to a biannual renewal fee.
So we can just strike that, subject to a biennial.
If the subcommittee is feeling like you only want it to be for 2 years, just have the permit be for 2 years and don't let them renew it.
Just one quick question. It's 2 years for that individual. There's not like, for example, between 2001 and 2003, when you have to renew, or is it 2 years for that individual?
My understanding is 2 years for that individual for that special permit.
And you're right, we don't need that.
All right, do we have any more?
Just to clarify, so that initial application fee is good for 2 years, and then if they want to continue, they pay that renewal fee. Is that correct, Tony?
No, we're saying that they have to apply for a license after 2 years.
After 2 years, okay.
Yeah.
But as it reads currently under subdivision E right now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do we have any more comments? Any more discussion on this? Any public comments?
Joanne Galliano, again, this time speaking as an educator and a former program director, I think that the 5 years is not unreasonable, as Ms. Hurwood, Dr. Hurwood, explained. In an educational institution, sometimes it's going to be a situation where you are working on a continuing project or something like that. So if your focus is on that, to have to focus on that and then have to focus on licensure as well, I would think you'd want to give them enough time to actually determine whether they're going to actually even stay in the state. I mean, I may just have a 2-year project and not know I'm going to be here for 5 years. And so I wouldn't have even started that application process for licensure. If I have the 5 years, then after 2 years I realize I'm going to stay, then I still have time to be able to go through that licensure process. In educational institutions, your contract generally is fluid. I mean, if you're especially a special project, you may be there for 2 years and then realize that that project is going to extend for another 2 years. So you wouldn't want to go through the whole licensure process thinking you're only going to be here for 2 years. But if it extends, then you're making that commitment to stay for a long enough time that you probably it would behoove you to have a license anyways to be practicing in the state. So I don't think the 5 years is unreasonable. They would have to still renew. I think you should leave in the renewal. They'd have to renew the permit. But if they chose to stay longer than 5 years, then they would have to get a California license before they could renew that permit again. So it's putting in language that would say you renew every 2 years. However, if you pass, if you're going to go, well, you could even say, to make it easy, 2 renewal cycles, so that'd be 4 years. After the second renewal cycle, you would have to get a California license in order to continue. Did you do that?
This raises a question for me. My question is, what is the burden on the individual that is making the application? What are the costs, the time involvement? I'm just not understanding why they can't do it like right away, for that matter.
Mr. Lum, do you have something to?
I'm sorry, do what right away? When you say do that right away?
Get the license. Because
they can get the license, if they want to apply for a license, but if they're going to come in under a special permit, then they have this.
Okay, but here's my point. If it takes 5 minutes to fill out an application and then $50 or whatever, this is what I'm trying to figure out, is what is the burden on the individual? Why aren't we just saying, do it now?
I haven't been presented with an issue to address it. I mean, we honestly haven't had any applications for the special permit. So as far as addressing it now, I'm not sure what you mean by that in comparison to.
By applying for the license, just right away, for that matter.
You mean just get the RDH license?
On the other hand, if it costs $10,000 and it takes you 3 years to go through courses or something to get it, but you indicated you could get it right away in 60 days, but if it was, really burdensome, then I could understand having, 5 years to make up your mind. But if it's relatively easy and relatively cheap, I don't see why.
It is involved to get your license. It is an involved process. And sometimes these people would be coming in for short periods of time. Like Michelle was describing, where they're an expert and they come in and they are going to be on the clinic floor to do.
Okay, I get all that part. It's the involved process part that I'm wanting to know about.
Yeah.
Because he was indicating 60 days.
Well, 60 days, but before that, you have to put a lot of paperwork together.
That's what I wanted to know about.
Yes. That part is relatively involved as far as getting your transcripts, your for an out-of-state hygienist. And
they may need to take a clinical exam depending on, so there is a cost,
and that's why
a couple $1,000. I mean, it's expensive, so it would depend upon when that clinical exam was offered, what time of year that would be. So they would have to pay to prove that they passed their national board. They would have to pass the correct, acceptable clinical exam that we would accept in our state. They would have to pay for a certificate that said that they passed that. They would have a $100 application fee.
So it's a little more involved than just making an application. Yes, that's why I asked the question, if they satisfy all of this, can they make the application? And the answer was yes, and it takes 60 days. To me, that sounded like a no-brainer.
Some could,
but what you're
some
describing
might, but some might not.
Is different.
Right.
So now I understand.
Okay, great.
All right. Any other comments? Yes.
Just a clarification, if the language is changed to 5 years, are we looking at modifying that first sentence? Is that where you want it? Is that what the proposal is?
I'm all for wherever it fits the best. And one thing that is also missing is we're not requiring any fingerprinting for these individuals.
Valid. That's really valid. Yeah, that's important.
It wasn't my idea. Tracy's sitting next to me and she pointed it out.
It's a great idea.
Thank you, Tracy.
She makes me look really good.
It's a great idea.
She pointed it out, and and it is valid. I mean, that is something that maybe we kind of missed that when we created this part of the statute years ago. I guess my point is, as a subcommittee, if we're going to open up and do something in this section, we might as well make it the best it can be.
Yeah. So Gary, you had no opposition to 5 years?
Now that I know what's
Okay?
Now that I know what's involved, I have no opposition to 5 years. I also believe that we should include the fingerprinting thing that she is talking about.
And Vanjie, did you have any opposition to the 5 years? And then, obviously, and I will go with that also. Okay, so we, as a committee here, we're saying that we want to make all those changes before we bring this forward. Can we bring this back to the meeting tomorrow with those changes?
Yes.
Is that okay? Okay, so then we're gonna put this one on.
Can we just accept it in concept and then just have the actual language tomorrow, or do we have to have the actual language in order to move it forward?
I think you can accept it in concept. I think Adina and I can maybe work on some language tonight.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, I'll turn the time back over to Mr. Lum and Dr. Petty. And move on to, unless anybody has any other comments on 1902.3, we'll move on to 1913.
So the revision in this section is just for further clarification. It just seems like further clarification was needed to indicate that the qualifications for the individual is appropriately educated and trained for what the services that they're providing. It's a clarification statement. That's all it is.
Do we have any comments from the committee?
I'm curious as to whether this would impact the situation that you had indicated about not having training in a particular item. But you already have your license. Then this has a requirement to have completed the appropriate education and training required to perform the procedure as opposed to getting the license.
So for myself, as I look at this, where I'm seeing this would be, we're in the appropriate supervision level, but have you been trained on how to use a laser or other device that we would be having in the dental setting? That's how I'm looking at it. Mr. Lum, is that correct?
That's correct. There's the profession itself is always changing. There's new devices, there's new techniques that come about. So this is just to make sure that the individual has the appropriate training and education to use those things and the services that they're providing. Like the big question that comes up for our office is the use of lasers. And so individuals just ask, how do I get certification? Whether it's the provider of that laser, the manufacturer, or what have you, or whether they take a CE course to show that they've been properly educated and shown how to use that device. Those are the types of things that we want to make clear in this revision.
And I think I think Gary, the big part of this for me as a dental hygienist, many of the things that I'm doing now, I was not educated in school, so as new things come forward, having this in place is an important part.
When we say education, is that always formal, or can it be like basically on the job training kind of?
As long as the person has the information to convey to you appropriately. Michelle?
I do think 1914 covers this. So I think the way that we wrote the statute, 1913 kind of gives them the authority. 1914 says you can use any material or device as long as you're educated. So I don't know if it's duplicative.
Are you sorry?
No.
I think my only concern, especially laser, is that, like Gary just brought up, when you say appropriate education and training, I've run across too many places where they want the doctor, watch the CD on laser, go use it now. And to me, that's not acceptable. That's the only thing I see when I see this.
And I get what you're saying there completely, but this is something that we have to leave up to the individual supervising person as it talks in there about the appropriate level of supervision, and that's up to the dentist to see if that's appropriate or not. We have not been definitive about what education means when it comes to devices, and we have to trust the conscience of those who are in the field.
I would just say that 1914 tells you what you can do, but it doesn't have any prohibitory language within it. This would say that you have to have that.
And any more comments from the committee before I go back to Dr. Petty?
Well, yes, I do understand what you're saying, Noel, I do. But I just think the fact that we're going to put the consumer at risk of injury before the clinician realizes I need proper training and not just watching the CD from my doctor.
Right, but unless we get very descriptive on this, we have to trust that dental healthcare professionals would do the right thing. The hard part of this is we don't even know if someone has a certification system or if they're doing a CE, if it's going to be as specific as we want it to be or give the information you need. So that's why we as clinicians have to take that responsibility on to make sure that we're trained, and then as well as the supervising dentist. Any more committee member comments before we go to?
I do feel like 1914 does cover it because it says education and training. And I have to agree somewhat with what Noel is saying. Our Practice Act has always been written in a way that assumes that the clinician is going to be doing the right thing. And when something goes wrong, unfortunately, that's when they then need to show us that they did have the appropriate education and training in order to conduct whatever procedure they're doing that they had the problem with. That's how it's always been with our Practice Act. We haven't been specific about you must have this kind of training to do this kind of thing. So, I mean, I'm not exactly opposed to adding it in. I just don't know if it's going to get kicked back because of 1914.
May I?
Yes.
1914, I would agree with you. If it had the word only after may, it says may do as opposed to may only do. Anyway, that's my comment.
Okay, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Petty and see what she has to add to this.
So if you look at 1913, it's perform procedures or provide services, whereas 1914, how I'm reading it, is use of materials and devices authorized. So procedures don't necessarily involve, a device. So it was clarifying procedures as opposed to devices and materials. So that's how I'm interpreting it. I could be interpreting it incorrectly, but.
Would you be open to using the same language? Well, they did kind of, except they added required.
I think there is some overlap here, because 1914 does say any material or device approved for use in the performance of a service or procedure.
And I personally, because I've been asked this question so many times, am not opposed to having it in two places, making the statement twice, because it is something that comes up repetitively.
I don't want the subcommittee to think I'm opposed. It's just that oftentimes when we do these kinds of things, it doesn't go forward because it's considered, there's a philosophical conversation here of whether or not we should have duplicative type language in the statute especially. So.
But in review of the questions that we receive as staff, I think it's an important statement to delineate between the services provided and materials and devices. And it just, again, helps to clarify. Some individuals may look at it as, well, this says the same thing, but we're focusing more on procedures on this section, whereas 1914 is the materials and devices. And believe me, the questions we get, people delineate those things very specifically when they're asking us.
Any other comments from the committee? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, let's go ahead and move forward to 1917, the requirements for licensure, and Dr. Petty and Mr. Lum, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. The first highlighted section, this kind of corrects what was previously agreed upon as far as the clinical examination is concerned. When we first presented this in the requirements for licensure, the prior section had no term, no date of how long an individual could pass a clinical exam and still be licensed. So a couple of instances, we were forced to issue a license with somebody who hadn't been working for 12 years. So with this, it was presented in the past of, let's put a cap on the number of years that that clinical exam could be valid for. And it was decided that 2 was the deciding numbers. Well, probably unbeknownst to the board at that time, it created a real gap for individuals, especially coming from out of state. Individuals who have passed their exam 2.5 to 4.5 years don't qualify for a license, and they have to retake the exam. Now, the 5 years was originally presented because that goes hand in hand with licensure by credential. So what we want to propose here is to change it back to 5 years if the subcommittee agrees to this modification. So that way, individuals, especially from out of state, there won't be that gap of individuals that, they've been practicing, but they're at that 3-year mark where they technically don't qualify for licensure by credential. But at the same time, we don't want to force them to have to retake a clinical exam that they just passed 3 years ago. So I ask for your approval on this.
Any comments from the committee?
I'm supportive.
I am also supportive. Any comments from the public?
Joanne, only a question then. This means that I could take my exam 5 years preceding and I've never practiced and still be granted an initial license. So you're saying that you're comfortable with a student taking a licensure exam, waiting 5 years, and then applying for licensure. There's no requirement here that they have to practice at all. So I think that's where the 2 years came in. There was a concern that you would have someone who took a licensure exam 5 years ago, didn't practice at all for whatever reason, and then all of a sudden comes to California and wants a license. That's, to me, the question on the table. And I understand the licensure by credential issue, but maybe we should look at licensure by credential and see if there's some way that we could manipulate that language to allow for someone who's been practicing for 4 years. I mean, the licensure by credential, to me, is where the issue lies. I don't think it lies with initial licensure where it's placed right now. If the problem's with licensure by credential, I think we should look at licensure by credential and maybe rework that language to allow for people that have worked a certain amount of hours or whatever in a shorter period of time or something. But I think consumer protection, I don't know that I would want someone who took a licensure exam 5 years ago and not practiced at all to be my hygienist.
When you're coming in by licensure by credential, you have to practice a minimum of 750 hours for 5 years.
Correct.
So
But this is not licensure. You're looking at initial licensure here. You're saying you want someone to be able to take a licensure exam 5 years ago, not prove they practiced, and you're going to grant them a license. Because
well, the recommendation came because before we didn't have a restriction at all. So this was kind of the compromise to where we didn't want to be overburdensome for individuals to have to take it, after they passed recently. So rather than
without some criterion in here that says they have to have done some kind of practice in those 5 years, I think that this is not. I don't feel this is in the best interest of the consumer, and that's why I'm suggesting: why are we looking at initial licensure and the exam issue and granting licensure, and not looking at if the problem is coming when people can't apply for licensure by credential because it's only been 3 years, and we think 3 years that's enough time. They practiced for 3 years. They took an exam 3 years ago. Then I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be looking at licensure by credential and maybe modifying that as opposed to modifying something that's, that's going to allow someone to practice to get a license without practicing for 5 years.
Thank you. Vanjie.
I do agree with Joanne. I think that if I recall when we had the meeting, we did discuss it. That was my point. 2 years. I think it was believed that a student graduates, they want to start a family, all that, but 5 years is a long time to not practice and then apply for a license and still get a license.
Okay, thank you. I personally, anybody who is a hygienist and even has a license could wait 5 years and not practice for 5 years and come back and practice in this state. So I think we're getting a little, for myself, I think it's maybe not in the best interest. I wanted to let Dr. Petty, and then we'll see if there's any more committee comments and go to public.
So what I think I'm hearing is from Joanne Galliano and the board, would you be opposed to changing licensure by credential to 2 years and the initial licensure to 5, keeping it at 5? So eliminate the gap that way.
Can we come back and get an answer to that after we hear from the public and see if there's any more comments, and then we'll come back to you? Okay.
One of the things I was thinking of is there is the option of clinical remediation courses for initial applicants who haven't worked in the 5 years, graduated, haven't worked. But I think that because of the process of applying for a license, they have to apply before anything gets reviewed. So that could be an issue. Nobody knows that they haven't worked for 5 years until they apply. Am I correct? Am I thinking correctly on that?
Yeah, until we get the application, we have no idea what their history is. I mean,
Right.
we don't get those reports and everything. So, yeah, that would be the time when we review what their qualifications are for the license.
So let's just say it could be a California graduate who never applies for a license within 5 years. It could be someone from out of state who never applied for a license, after graduation, and now they're coming in. They haven't worked at all. That could be something to review with regard to how can they better be identified in the first place, and how best to address their lack of experience prior to a California license and protecting the public. Because we do have clinical remediation courses that are approved, and maybe that's all that's needed, even if it's lowering the number of hours of refresher courses or something like that, in order to make sure that they're meeting the standards for California licensing.
Thank you. Any committee member comments? Any comments from Mr. Lum?
No comments.
And Dr. Petty, would you mind asking us the question again that you were trying to get clarified, and then we can go ahead and have each committee member share?
So what Ms. Kimbrough had, or was it Ms. Kimbrough? No,
Ms.
Ms. Galliano brought up about the 5 years. She was concerned about the 5 years of no practice. And it's been brought to the board's attention about the the gap between the 2 years and the 5 years. Would the board consider changing the licensure by credential to 2 years, and licensure by credential 2 years of practice, full-time practice, as opposed, and then the initial licensure at 5? Yes, and that would.
Initial at 2 years.
No, initial at 5 years. Wait, no. Yes, you are correct, yes.
Say
Sorry.
that once more for us to clarify, please.
Goodness. Now I'm confusing myself. Okay, so keeping initial licensure at 2 years, but then licensure by credential, since there is that gap, changing that to 2 years as well. Or what you could also do is put a subdivision for practice history in the initial licensure.
I guess I'm confused, because why would they have, I don't think our application talks about practice history for an initial license. So when that comes in, all we have is the date that they pass their REB or credits, which are the 2 exams. Mm-hmm. So that's all we have. We don't know anything else. We may know if they hold another license in another state. I don't even think that's on the initial application.
Yes.
Is it?
It
is, thank you, Tracy. So we might know that they might have a license in Nebraska, for instance.
But
we don't know anything about practice.
Right, but if the concern is 5 years practice, someone's coming in for an initial licensure, and their REB exam was 5 years ago. If you're concerned about consumer protection and want to ensure that they've been practicing for initial licensure, add that into statute.
I guess my only concern is, we're making a lot of, there's no evidence that's been presented that says 2 years, 5 years after passing, you won't be a competent dental hygienist. We're making a lot of leaps, saying, I know we passed this, but I wasn't that keen on having a date anyway, but I don't see any evidence that says 2 years or 5 years from taking your REB, you wouldn't be equally as good of a dental hygienist. We're making a lot of assumptions that just because you haven't practiced for 2 years or 5 years that you're not going to be competent. I don't think there's any evidence that suggests that.
As far as my recollection, we don't have any specific evidence according to what Ms. Hurlbut says. The original request for the time frame was just because of the consumer risk for those individuals that we did have to license that were open-ended and they did not practice for double-digit years. So that's why it was originally presented.
Any other comments from the committee? Dr. Petty, so you had asked us if we would be willing to have it be 2 years and 2 years, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Gary, do you have any comments on that?
I think I would agree.
Okay. Vanjie?
I would agree.
Okay. Michelle?
I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to settle on why would we change one thing over the why. I don't know. There's a part of me that says, why would we change licensure by credential, which has been working well for us for a long time, just because we can't settle on what we want to do with the initial licensure.
Well, I do see what Michelle is saying. I think my main concern is just initial licensure. I really don't care for the 2 years. I don't understand why you don't graduate and apply right then and there. That's just my personal thought. 2 years, just apply right now. You just went to school for 2 years. But 2 years is better than 5.
Mr. Lund?
Just a question, since this discussion has gone a lot longer than what I expected it to go. I think we should, hold off on any decision for this, and staff will do some more research and come back with new language.
Okay.
And see what we can do with it.
Okay, so on number 1917, Gary, do you agree that we're going to hold this?
Yes.
Vanjie? Michelle?
I wanted to talk about G, but.
Go ahead.
Can we do that? Okay.
We'll talk about that later, or we'll talk about that right now, Mr. Lund?
If everybody's
Okay.
done.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I'm not necessarily opposed to requiring current CPR. I have a couple of questions. 1016 requires either American Heart Association or Red Cross CPR. That's the only two that we will accept. Is that what you're meaning by as prescribed by the Dental Hygiene Board?
Correct. It would still follow the continuing education regulations for the providers. And the reason why this was put in there is because we identified a little bit of a gap. I think you have to have BLS when you're enrolled in the educational program, and you have to have it once you're licensed and as a requirement for license renewal. However, from the point in time from the initial license until your first renewal, there's nothing in the law that says you have to be certified in BLS. So whether it's 6 months, whether it's a year and a half, whether it's the full 24 months, new practitioners could continue to practice without BLS as a requirement. So I think this covers that gap in the BLS coverage from being a student to being a practitioner.
Thank you. Any other comments on this section before we move on to section 1917.1? Any public comment? Seeing none, we're going to hold this for the time being, and Mr. Lum has shared that they will work on getting this clarified a little bit more, so it's on hold for now. We'll move on to section 1917.1, and Dr. Petty and Mr. Lum.
In 1917.1, we request that the board consider adding subdivision 11. There was, it was erroneously excluded from the licensure by credential. Whoa, hang on, my thing just went flying. It was erroneously omitted from the licensure by credential list of requirements for issuance of the license. So in order to clarify, we wanted to make sure that it was captured.
Any comments from the committee? Okay, seeing none. Any comments from the public? Seeing none. Mr. Shea? Okay, Banji? And Michelle? Yes. Okay, and myself also. All right, moving on to section 1922, licensure as an RDH AP.
For this section, it's a clarifying issue. Multiple schools have different ways of interpreting what equivalency to a bachelor's degree is. And so by definition, this is what we researched and found, that a bachelor's degree or its equivalent is recognized as a minimum of 120 semester credit hours or 180 credit or quarter credit hours in post-secondary education. So it's just a clarifying statement.
Okay. Any comments from the committee?
Don't we have this somewhere else? Nowhere else?
It's not defined.
It's not defined. We have, so you're thinking of definitions in 1101? Yeah.
All right.
1100, sorry.
Any public comment? Seeing none. Mr. Shea? Ms. Ward? And Ms. Hurlbut? Okay, I am also okay. Moving on to section 1930, RDHAP relationship with the dentist.
Yes, I think so.
At the subcommittee's request, this will actually be reviewed under the licensing subcommittee. So can we move past this one and have the licensing subcommittee address it?
Okay, so we'll move that to the licensing subcommittee. So section 1930, the RDHAP relationship with the dentist, will be moved to licensing. Any committee comments?
Is this already on their agenda? Oh.
And any public comments? Seeing none. Mr. Shea, are you okay with that? Yes. Okay, Ms. Ward? Ms. Hurlbut? Okay, and I am too. Moving on to section 1941, approval of education programs, need for new educational programs.
Do you want me to?
Oh, yes, please.
Okay. We do not have, the DHBC currently does not have a process for approving new educational programs for RDHAPs. We have received an initial request for an RDHAP program, and since we do not have regulations, statute regarding RDHAP, educational programs, we drafted language to include that so it would be clear for what the application process would be.
All right. Do we have any comments from the committee? I would like to make a comment myself. I think that not only do we need to look at what is within that new educational program, but we need to see whether there is a need for another educational program. We would be asking them to bring something forward that shows us the need for the program. Yes.
This is why this is being proposed, because currently, if somebody were to apply right now, the current statute that requires for an RDH program to submit a, what is it, that survey?
Mm-hmm.
Feasibility study, I'm sorry. It doesn't apply for the RDH-AP programs. So if somebody were to apply right now, that's not a requirement yet.
Any comments? Oh, Michelle?
I don't believe we have regs on what constitutes a feasibility study yet, do we? I know we worked on them. They're somewhere in the office. We did work on them. I don't know where they are, but I would think at this point, if we're going to be changing statute to include that, we're going to need to dig out that for not only new dental hygiene programs, but new RDH-AP programs. So hopefully somebody can locate those somewhere.
I will get on that.
Okay. Any comments from the committee? Any comments from the public?
Joanne Galliano, and one of the people that was involved in creating this category of the RDH-AP. I think the purpose of the feasibility study with dental hygiene programs is that we are seeing a preponderance of programs cropping up everywhere, and we didn't have a need for that many dental hygienists. We only have 600 right now RDH-APs and 2 programs. I don't think that a feasibility study, if we go with what, having been a part of developing to the requirements for a feasibility study, it's quite involved. It's not a simple process to go through, and I would hate to see RDH-AP programs, which are required by law to follow the HMPP protocols, et cetera, the law is very specific about what has to be in an RDH-AP program, that they would have to do a feasibility study. At this point, I don't think that we have an overpreponderance of RDH-APs, and we don't have an overpreponderance of RDH-AP programs. This, to me, would be a barrier to RDH-AP programs being established, and I think we need more RDH-AP programs established, not less. So I would hate to see the requirement be that they have to do a feasibility study, because the way we had defined feasibility study for new programs is quite extensive. So you might be cutting off the ability for a hygienist to become an RDH-AP due to lack of programs, and especially lack of programs in areas where currently there are not programs.
Thank you for your input. Any more comments from the committee?
What will happen if this passes in statute, which could happen sooner than us getting regulations ready for feasibility studies? What will happen? Will we do it by a case-by-case basis again and have them just submit to us what they think a feasibility study is? Because you know where I'm going with that, right?
I would say at this point in time, due to lack of regulations, we would need to take it on a case-by-case basis. I mean, that's the only way we can review it and see if it's an appropriate program. One other aspect that we could take in regards to Ms. Galliano's comment was that I understand that the RDH feasibility study is pretty involved, and I understand the need for the RDH-AP programs. There could be boundaries for a different feasibility study than for the RDH programs, because I know the reason why the feasibility study language was put in there for the RDH program. However, with the needs for RDH-APs, the board, subcommittee, subsequently the board, could structure it in a different way.
All right, any more comments from the committee? Any comments from the public? All right, do we need to do anything with this at this point? You guys are still working on this one as far as the language goes, or is this? Tony, on 1941, are you saying that this is complete? Or are we saying that we need to clearly define what a feasibility study is before we do this?
Well, the statutory language here is complete.
Okay.
So what we would do then is, if there's any modifications needed, say for a feasibility study, we would do that in regulations.
Okay, thank you. All right. Gary? Okay, great. Michelle? Okay.
I guess, what if we just didn't have it in there? Left it out, and then as more concern is raised about having more AP programs, then consider adding it in. I don't know, just a thought.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. And I'm in favor of what we have written so far. All right, moving on to the next area, we'll go on to 1950.5, unprofessional conduct defined.
So this section is modifying the requirement for any dental treatment that requires the patient to have medical treatment for a period exceeding 24 hours to be reported to the board. We're trying to eliminate that because, in staff's opinion, if somebody goes in for a dental treatment that requires 24 hours of medical care, there's something severe on that going on. So we would like that reported immediately.
Why don't we take the second part of that at the same time?
Okay. The second part in Z is something that we've experienced in our investigations, and as far as, shall we just call it fraudulent documentation or what have you. So if somebody falsely misrepresents themselves or what have you, we just want to make sure that this section is included in there, so that way we can identify it as unprofessional conduct for enforcement cases.
From the committee, Gary, do you have any comments? Okay. Michelle? I see that look on your face.
Can you give me an example of what you're talking about?
For the reporting?
Yeah.
The proposal was to make it consistent with the dental board statutes. So the dental board doesn't have a requirement that the patient be treated by a hospital for a 24-hour period unexpectedly before they had to report that to the board. But dental hygiene does. So to make it consistent and also to capture those incidences, I know that it was previously discussed about administering local anesthesia and there not being reporting requirements, but this may be a reason why, because if the patient is not admitted to a hospital for more than 24 hours, they're not required to report that to the board.
So D says knowingly making any statement or signing a certificate or other document directly or indirectly related to the practice of dental hygiene, which falsely represents the existence or non-existence of a state of facts. So
So that one was related to, we used to rely on 480 of the Business Professions Code, which changed in law at the beginning of the year. So the way that it was explained to me, if something is not clearly defined in unprofessional conduct, we can use the general unprofessional conduct language. However, it would require a subject matter expert to give the opinion that that falls within unprofessional conduct, whereas we had it in law previously in 480, but when that changed, we can no longer rely on that particular law section. So to add it to our unprofessional conduct would make it clearly again.
So is this the same language that was in 480 then?
this language was researched and adapted from the medical board.
Any more comments from the committee? Any comments from the public? All right, Gary? I'm fine with this. Okay, Vanjie? Michelle? And I am also. So we'll move on to probation options in 1951. And if you two would like to. Okay.
So, in probation, it is required for the licensee to obtain additional training or pass an examination upon completion of training. But it was not clear what training or education was necessary. So to capture it, to make sure that, they're not saying, oh, I received additional training at Joe's Dental Hygiene School. We wanted to make sure that the remedial education course was approved by the board prior to saying, yes, that's okay.
And as a committee member and also someone that supplies remedial education, I think this is important. I also think that when I receive someone that is making an inquiry about remedial education, many times they cannot identify what it is they need remedial education in, and that's why I'm glad that you put in here approved by the dental board, but also it would be nice when we're looking at probation for it to be a little more definitive for the schools that are offering those courses.
I do have a question. So the regulations that we have on remedial education, would follow those regs for this? Okay.
Any more questions or comments from members of the committee? Any comments from the public? Gary?
Support.
Vanjie? Michelle? I also support. This being, I'd like to, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to ask for a motion here.
I'd like to make a motion. My motion would be to refer these items to the full board for consideration, except that 1902.3 would be with the understanding that additional language may be coming forward for the full board to look at, that we will hold 1917 and that we will refer 1930 to the licensing subcommittee.
And do I hear a second on that?
I will second it, except for I think we do need G on 1917. I think the only hold is on the 5 years.
We're holding it.
Right.
Just the 5 years. So G.
Okay.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. I second then.
All right, let's go ahead and take a vote. Gary?
Aye.
Vanjie? Aye. Michelle?
Aye.
Noel Couch? Aye. Do we have any future agenda items for this committee? Where'd I go here? I lost myself. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, I lost it. Okay, so we're gonna go to RDH is licensed in another, take me where I am. All right, so we're going to go to agenda item number 4, discussion of possible action and recommendation to the full board on proposed draft regulatory language for 16 CCR 1104.3 site visits, investigations, cite and fine, and probationary status for dental hygiene educational programs. I'll turn the time over to Dr. Petty and Mr. Lum.
So, Business and Profession Code 1941.5 allows review of dental hygiene programs for dental hygienists in alternative practice, and dental hygienists in extended functions. Board has developed a draft regulatory language to implement the provisions of BPNC 1941.5. So staff created language for you to review regarding site visits, investigations, cite and fine, and probationary status in order to implement 1941.5. And additionally, I forgot, there is also 1944 A13, any fees for the hygiene board to conduct a site visit allows us to capture some of the costs, not to exceed the actual cost incurred by the hygiene board for those site visits.
So this regulation is in support for intermediary penalties for educational programs, as supported by the statute that was provided in our Sunset Bill.
Do we have any committee discussion on this? Seeing none, do we have any public discussion on this? I want to thank you for the amount of time that went into this and for the process that has moved forward. I know this has been very time consuming, so thank you for all that you put into this section. Do we want to go ahead and take?
Move to adopt.
Okay, and do I hear a second on that?
A second.
And let's go ahead and take a vote, and I'll say yes, and Michelle? And Vanjie?
Aye. Yes.
And Gary?
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much. Was there public comment on that? I asked for public comment when I went through do we have any other public comment? Okay. We'll move on to number 5, the discussion of possible action and recommendations to the full board to move current dental board regulations pertaining to dental hygiene to the board's regulatory section through section 100 request. And so I'll turn this over to Tony and.
Thank you. For this section, this is in regards to our regulatory sections that are still under the dental board's regulatory sections. This is a general request from the subcommittee for staff to begin working with the dental board to look at these regulations pertaining to dental hygienists and request for, because it's under their authority, request for them to possibly move those into the dental hygiene board's regulatory sections. And then once we do that, then we can look at revising these sections according to what, as far as updating and according to our needs. So what staff will do is identify the sections that need to be transferred and work with the dental board to have those pertaining to dental hygienists moved to our sections. So I ask for your approval.
Has the dental board agreed to that switch, that conversion over to the dental hygiene board?
Well, I have to get the permission from my board first.
But it's their regulations, right? I don't.
Correct,
So if they were to
correct, but-
oppose it, even if this board were to say yes, and their board were to say no, for example, then you kind of have a stalemate.
Okay.
I believe our statute does allow for us to use the dental board regulations in lieu of us not having regulations that cover certain, I mean, it's in the beginning of our early in the Practice Act.
Correct. It says that
I'm not sure-
we can use those sections until we promulgate our own regulations. So in cleaning up the Practice Act, this would just be, because we have that separation now, I just felt that this would be a cleaner approach to have those sections moved into the dental hygiene board's sections of regulations. But because it's split between two authorities, that's why I'm requesting permission to work with the dental board in order to do so.
Okay. Any comments from our committee? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
Move to adopt.
And do I have a second?
I will second.
Okay. Myself, I'll say yes. Michelle?
I'm not exactly sure what we're voting on. Are we moving to relocate? Are we moving to ask whether or not they'd be willing to work with us on that?
Thank you. This is just permission for staff to work with the dental board. It involves requesting to have those sections moved because it's not under our authority. So this is whether we present it at their next meeting or what have you, it's just permission for staff to begin working on this.
I'm okay with that as long as that's what the motion says.
Do I hear a motion? Oh, you did, okay, and you have the second, we'll go ahead and take a vote, which was Michelle, and you're okay? Gary? Aye. And Evangeline? Aye. Thank you. So it's already. Thank you very much. We'll move on to number 6 now, which is discussion of possible action and recommendations to the full board to approve the board's forms and fee resolution for the out-of-state dental hygiene education programs and individual applicants' review and approval of training and the procedures of soft tissue curettage, local anesthesia administration, nitrous oxide, and oxygen. Do I have any discussion? Actually, we'll turn the time over to Dr. Petty.
So at the January 29th, 2019 teleconference, the board amended and approved amendments to CCR 1105.2, which allows the Dental Hygiene Board to review out-of-state SLN courses. And in order to do that, we needed to incorporate by reference forms, and the forms are below for the subcommittee to review, to apply for out-of-state SLN courses.
All right, do we have any comments from the committee? Seeing none, any comments from the public? Seeing none, do I see a motion, or do I hear a motion on the board, on the floor? Okay, second?
I will second.
Okay. And we'll go ahead and take a vote. And I got myself lost again. All right, Noel Couch, yes. Michelle Hurlbut?
Yes.
Gary Shea?
Aye.
And Evangeline Ward?
Aye.
Thank you. Yes.
Does that vote also include the resolution to adopt the fees? Okay, just making sure.
All right, we'll move on to Ledge Reg number 7, which was public comments for items not on the agenda. Do I have any public comments for items not on the agenda? Do we have any future agenda items that this committee would like to bring up?
Maybe looking at the issue of informed consent.
And I agree with you, Michelle, and I think that we've already got things in place on that, but I think we need to investigate and make sure it's part of our education package. And I think that making sure that we have it in place and that people are aware is really important. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting at 11:35. I'd like to thank the committee for serving and for all the staff members' diligent work that they've done on this. Thank you.